starting this program called the STEM Ambassador Program that is taking an ambassadorial approach to public engagement of science. And just as nations send representatives who are culturally sensitive to other nations to interact with them, to exchange in a two-way sort of manner, so we scientists might become ambassadors to nations, so to speak, outside of science. And we have basically then developed a way to, and what we'd like to talk about today and tell you what we've been able to accomplish in terms of strategic placement of scientists in venues that improve accessibility of science to those who might not automatically think science is a really wonderful thing. So for example, taking scientists and placing them in corrections institutions just temporarily to give science lectures, taking trivia games, science trivia games to bars and restaurants, bringing scientists to senior assisted living centers as seniors can't, even if they are interested in science, they're not able physically because of health or accessibility reasons to get to science institutions, and places that provide access to lower income folks and provide science materials and science education there. So we'll be talking to you then today about the training process that we've developed over the last 2.5 years. We start out with, this is really in 5 parts. We first distilled the scientists' research and personal interests and experiences to develop what we call their impact identity. This is something that Julie Rizian has developed as something really important, I think, in terms of trying to find connections and ways of connecting people together. Secondly, we create an immersion visit in which the scientists visit a venue of that focal group that they think they might be able to connect with. Thirdly, scientists apply what they've learned from the immersion visit to try to create an engagement activity or event that's appropriate to that focal group and to that venue. Fourthly, scientists receive communication training so that they can facilitate that communication more easily. And fifth, and this is something that is often missing from many training programs, scientists have an opportunity to reflect and share what they've learned about that engagement experience. This training takes about 8 hours, and we'll talk to you about the different formats in which we've offered this. I'll just give you some examples of what we've done so far. One of our science or STEM ambassadors is herself a musician, and she's an ornithologist. And so she created a musical event in a cafe and also created a YouTube music video that incorporated the sounds of birds and music with her research on migratory birds and placed that into a musical cafe. Another of our ambassadors, Julia McGonigal, who's a microbiologist and who herself is very interested in fermentation cooking, making kimchi and sauerkraut, became a co-chef at a cooking class at one of our local grocery stores. She provided the information about which microorganisms are responsible for which aspects of fermentation, which was of intense interest to the cooking class people. At the same time, she was able to learn new recipes to satisfy her own personal interests. We had another ambassador who's a hydrologist and works with water conservation, gives some lectures and workshops in our local county jail to the horticulture group there, the inmates there, and was able to talk to them about water conservation in their gardening activities. So just briefly, the outcomes that we've been able to produce so far in the last 2.5 years, we've trained 65 scientists. We've reached 2,000 people in 45 unique places or venues. A huge majority, 95% of our ambassadors said in their evaluations of themselves that they enjoyed and found this training very valuable to them. And about 95% of the local groups, the focal groups, the public people themselves also found that these STEM ambassadors, so to speak, were able to provide information that was useful to them, that was enjoyable to them, and perhaps most importantly to us, they sensed that the ambassadors were really trying to understand their culture, their values, rather than simply imposing the scientists' values on them. So participants were very open to science in these non-traditional venues was sort of our take-home message. And although our research proposal, talked all over the place about how we would try to get to these STEM inattentive audiences, after 65 events, we found that we actually were not able to find any STEM inattentive audiences. And what we realized then that it's really about this training and going to the venues that makes people more open than what we had anticipated at the very beginning. So our formats started out at the University of Utah, where we started our grant. We did in-person cohorts of 20 apiece. We've also started looking into online training. We've also done a training at another university with a point person who's a broader impacts science communication expert. These are just the venues in Salt Lake City where we live and across the country where we've been able to have STEM ambassadors provide engagement events.
So once the scientist has their immersion notes with the description of their group, they've reflected on those and pulled out kind of the key elements, we ask them to generate an insight statement. This is something pulled from the design thinking process, if you're familiar with that. So the statement takes the format of how might I engage with, and then in green here we have a description of your focal group based on your immersion, and then they list out their objectives. And so we ask them to describe their group. Who are they? What do they value? Mention any constraints that they noticed in the venue. So perhaps they want to engage in a correctional institution and there's a lot of security constraints that they need to keep in mind. And then they also include their objectives. So these statements take the form of kind of a run-on sentence here. This is an example from an engineer that we worked with. His statement is, how might I engage with citizens at a community council meeting who have offered me 10 minutes to speak and are concerned with the quality of life in Salt Lake City, to better understand perception of air quality issues, increase accessibility of air quality research, and recruit participants for citizen science projects. So you can see in green here, he's described his focal group. He's listed this constraint, this 10 minutes that he has to speak, and then he's also listed his objectives in blue. This is another scientist, this is a geologist that we worked with who was going to engage with children on an adaptive climbing trip. Her constraint was that there was going to be limited time where everyone was gathered together, and because they were going to be outside at a climbing wall, she wasn't going to have access to technology. And her objectives were to increase excitement about science, convey that the site that they were climbing at was an important source of water, and demonstrate that the students share interests with the scientists. She was also a climber herself, and so she was hoping to highlight that in her presentation. So once each scientist has an insight statement based on their immersion visit, we do a brainstorming exercise where the scientist writes their insight statement at the top of a large sheet of paper, and then in a big group, everyone's given a pad of sticky notes, and we generate ideas to fulfill that insight statement. Each idea is posted up under the statement, and the poster says the idea out loud. We ask them to avoid spending too much time on any one idea, so this is a place where it's really easy to get hung up on logistics, or where are you going to get the supplies for that, and how much is that going to cost, and we tell them at this stage, just get everything down on paper, and there's no bad ideas. So after they've gone forward and they'll leave this workshop essentially with a page full of sticky notes of potential engagement ideas. And then they're given some time to mull this over and select one idea or a couple, maybe it's a combination of ideas that they'd like to pursue for their engagement activity. And then the next step in the process is to actually provide them with the skills that they need to effectively implement that activity. And that is where Dennis comes in.
One of our first activities we do is called Building a Common Vision. It's set up so that me as the scientist, or one of the scientists, has a piece of paper, blank piece of paper in front of me. Some people I know are familiar with this. The other person who's a scientist but sitting in front of me has a drawing that they're going to convey to me. And I have to draw it, and through that interaction, I mean, they're not conveying science to me, but they're conveying information. I learn about how people learn and strategies that I can use in order to talk effectively with the audience that I'm trying to communicate with. So it doesn't negate anything they've learned now. They have to sit here and say, oh, well, what are the strategies that I just learned that I can apply in my activity there?
So we're trying now, one of the challenges that the STEM Ambassador Program is facing is how do we go about doing some innovative and creative evaluation methods in order to find out how well we have done in terms of engagement. I'll just mention as we close the different formats, the BI formats that the STEM Ambassador Program might lend themselves to in your department or your university. One of the ways that we've gone about trying to help individual scientists is to provide them with just the connection exercise. So they can carry that out in a very short period of time, just as you did. They can identify their focal group at least and put that into their proposal, and then if they get funded, they can go ahead and follow on with their engagement event. We might take them through the design phase where they actually have a venue, they have some relationships already established and a place to go and some idea of what the mode of communication might be, and they could put that in their proposals. Or in some cases, we've also been able to work with a group of scientists to take them through the entire STEM Ambassador training program for their broader impacts. We're right now working at the University of Utah with the Center for Chemical Innovation, which is an NSF-funded center that requires broader impacts to be carried out. And so we have this group of 12 chemists who we are now working with, doing a full STEM Ambassador training. So we are now at a point in terms of the STEM Ambassador program of trying to think about how we might scale up what we've been doing at the University of Utah. So we might be able to share what we've done with more people across the country in different kinds of institutions and situations. We're also really interested in learning about sustainability of the program. So far, we've been fully funded by the National Science Foundation. We have another grant proposal that is pending right now. We're sort of waiting on, biting our fingernails about whether we'll be funded. But we're trying to think of creative and innovative ways of funding this kind of program. And I'm sure those of you who do training are sort of in a similar position of trying to figure out how this can be sustainable financially and institutionally. So that's what we have to share with you at this point. We'd be eager to communicate with you during the meeting and after the meeting, and we would welcome any comments or questions or discussion that this might bring up. So thanks very much for being here.